you go live, right? And it starts sending the data to your stream key, that then on YouTube, it automatically starts the broadcast. But that wasn't the case, because if on YouTube you don't set that check mark on auto start, then YouTube will just on the live streaming dashboard show you that you're live, but it will wait until you press the go live button on the YouTube streaming suite as well, rather than just on the OBS. So YouTube keeps receiving the data, but it's not broadcasting it out into the world because it waits for you to give the go signal. And that's what happens. So we had a little pre-show for the first episode of Podcats that you guys on YouTube missed. That was only on Twitch exclusive, so to say.
Oh.
But welcome with me, our first guest. Who are you again?
I'm Piebypie.
We talked so much about all
The
kinds of topics
origins.
that we forgot your name. But it's okay. I'll upload it in full again. I'll re-upload it. But I think I'll
That's
just get it out. No problem. I can take it from the Twitch archives. But that's perfect because it was a really, really wide background, and now we're focusing in on a little bit more background. You told me that you studied project management, and how
Oh
did you
yeah.
get to do that? What was? Did you decide that? Did you just what led
Yeah.
you to you doing that? Let's ask the question
Honestly,
like
it's
that.
been a weird couple of years for me, and I realize if I look back over my professional journey that I've been all over the place, and a lot of the times I've just been taking like the first job that was available to me. And I started like in the pandemic, I reconsidered things and started feeling really passionate about UX design. Um, User experience design, for those who don't know what I'm talking about, was particular interest of mine, I think. But I went and did a certificate on that UX design topic in 2021. And then I did some work. I did a lot of contracts, and I worked for a game development studio for almost a year. And then my contract with them ended. And during that time period of 2022, the tech layoffs started on a very large scale, and they've affected game development and like IT across the board, like the big companies, the small companies, etc. And one of the biggest like roles that has been discarded at a really large scale is the user experience design field. Um, I think one of the biggest reasons why that particular area is suffering is because our deliverables, if you want to call them that, for a business are not necessarily tangible deliverables. Like if you said to someone, I need a bunch of menu screens, then the UI artist would or UI designer would go off and design those menu screens, and then you would have menu screens at the end. And you'd be like, cool, I know you did your job. But with user experience design, it's a lot of post-it notes and talking to people and having a lot of meetings and understanding stuff. And like I've talked to people who work at Atlassian and Zero, like the like payment processing software, massive $1 billion company. I think they're or like they're very, very rich. Anyway, there's actually like a part of their job where they're expected to just spend time what is called deep thinking, like that, like trying to show what the deliverable from deep thinking is quite difficult. So it doesn't surprise me that a senior executive is going like, how do we cut the fat? An accounting guy is telling me that we need to like reduce the amount of people doing this or that. And they're like, well, we don't really like need the UX design stuff. We just need the bits that come afterwards. So we don't have to follow that process because it costs money, and I don't necessarily see the value for the output, which I disagree with. And then they lay off the user experience designers, and then they go, oh, you know what, like our products are resulting in a massive like drop off of users, like we're losing subscribers, blah blah blah.
And we don't
Maybe
know
we
why.
should bring the guys back, but we'll bring them back for a lower pay rate. There'll be less of them, and they'll expect it to do more. And then you've got like hundreds and thousands of senior UX designers vying for like one role instead of many, and like a wealth of knowledge and experience. And I just found it was a far too competitive role, that I didn't have like a really strong portfolio of experience, and I was competing with much more experienced professionals than myself. And it was sad because I came out of my contract feeling like I've gotten this really awesome wealth of experience, but also being located in Australia, user experience design isn't as big of a role, and particularly not in game development, which is a really small part of Australian like industry. Like if I talk to other Aussies, like a lot of the games that they play are exported. They're not local games. Unless you're like really into indie games, and indie games can't afford UX designers usually. So what landed me in project management, a friend of mine suggested that I try it, has been working in project management. I had also other influences like my mom and stuff. They were like, the way that you think could really align with this. And I looked into it and was like, I feel like I want to go away from doing something that I have to justify the existence of. I mean, I know that I have to justify the existence of, but at least with project management, it's actually like people need that role in so many different industries, that you like. I don't know how to say this. I'm like constantly having to defend the existence of UX design. Like it's not the same. Like people know projects have to happen. People don't know that UX design needs to happen.
Okay.
They'll just like kind of find out afterwards that that didn't happen, and they'll be like, why does this suck? Like I was in this point in Path of Exile too where I was like, I got my first like item which allows me to ascend. And they were saying, like, the instruction was go to the desert map to use this, right? And so I didn't understand that I needed to just click on a location on the map because nothing was identified. And I was trying to, like, use the item to interact with the map in Act 2. And because there was no, like, it's just an unintuitive choice to me. Like, if the item is related to this thing, like, I mean, eventually got there, I was like, I gotta click this little diamond square thing that's gonna take me to this location where I can put this in a slot. But, like, that wasn't super clear to me. Anyway, I think
No, I totally get it. I mean, it didn't happen to me, but it could have very much happened. I mean,
I was, like,
totally empathize with
right-clicking the
that.
item and trying to put it onto the map. Like, I don't know. I feel bad.
I feel you use like a little bit of jargon there here and there, and just to clarify for those people who don't work in the field or in the industry, and maybe also for me, because I think I like to think I know what you said, but I'm not sure I 100% got it right. So just you said the deliverables aren't exactly tangible. So you mean like it's you
Okay,
can't
so when you
clearly define goalposts. Like your employer cannot really measure what you're doing or how much you're contributing, or
They can measure it. There are things that I can say that I've done. But the issue, and this is kind of specific to user experience design more so than other human-centered design fields, because there's a whole genre of people who work in this way of like solving problems for people, but in different contexts. So user experience design would be solving problems for people in a digital world. Whereas customer experience design is solving problems for people in like a physical world. So particularly in shops or like when you're walking around IKEA, that's a very designed customer experience. Like the whole like you walk through it and you have to go through here, but like that's customer experience design. And there are like other examples where like if you go into a shop and you can sort of like virtually try things on, or like they try like really interesting things like that. Whereas with user experience design, usually it means that there's a digital solution. So if you're doing a customer experience design that has a digital component, it'd be like, a really good example that I had a work experience with was a doctor's practice, like a medical practice, didn't have any way of like virtually checking in people who were waiting for an appointment. So introducing an entire like back end that they could, get like their appointments booked in with, and then be able to check in on their phone or use an iPad when they get to the location. So that's like a combined experience of the customer experience, like physically moving around the building, interacting with objects, using their phone, all that kind of stuff. And then the actual interfaces and menus and things that they're doing that process with, which is the user experience side, but also is then executed by a user interface and maybe a web program or something.
Okay.
When it comes to deliverables, like, I say that word because that's like something that a contractor is regularly asked for. So a deliverable is just like, how can I see the results of what you've done? And particularly with software and IT, with the like massive emphasis on agile and startup methodologies, people want to move towards a product that a user can interact with, like an actual end product, even a test of like a rudimentary one. You know, like, let's say a game design version. You've seen that video of Path of Exile from like 2008 or whatever, where it's just like a dude walking around and whacking a skeleton and stuff, and it looks super antiquated and everything. That is a deliverable. But there will be so many components that led to that are not deliverables that a user can use. Therefore, it's not a sellable product.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. I really literally only knew the word deliverables from sponsorship offers on Twitch or something like that, when they said your deliverables are like one Twitter post.
It's like, I paid for this thing. Where is that?
Yeah.
And the
So
answer
basically
is,
just a goalpost list.
I made a wireframe for you. I went through all these processes to prove that it would work. And I need you to take this wireframe and give it to a user interface designer to create some beautiful artwork so that it looks nice. And usually, like, a really collaborative experience would be that while I was producing my wireframe and going through my processes, I would talk to the user interface person and say, like, this is where I'm at. What do you think? Because they've also got experience, and it's worth including people. But I think of user experience design as something that links different departments together and makes you, like, if a game designer's concept is like, I have this really creative idea and I want to execute it, and then you've got like an artist and an engineer and a user interface artist and all that stuff. Like, my thing is to make sure that the vision that happened here is delivered in a way that is interactable, like something that, like, how do I explain this? If you write a book and you know what the motive for your main character is because you're the writer, but you don't necessarily get it out on the paper exactly in a way that the reader understood it, my point is to advocate for that reader and to use a lot of testing and processes to make sure that
give them
reader, so that it goes
Please
all
finish.
the way from start to finish, and like all of those different pieces of people who are contributing like get to the end.
I get that metaphor, right? The writer could write the book in a way that, like, his frame of reference, from his point of view, everything's perfectly clear, but then to the reader, it doesn't make any sense, and it's jumbled, and he lacks critical context.
Yeah.
No, I think that's a great metaphor, and also like what you said with the comparison of the customer experience in a mall or in a furniture shop or whatever.
Yeah,
but then in a virtual sense.
Because game design's been around for long enough that if you proposed to a game designer, and I've been through this, that they're not quite able to do user advocacy in the same way as I am, because their position as game designer gives them much more knowledge and bias for what they're interacting with when they are testing it or prototyping it. That they're like, well, I can put myself in that person's shoes. And I'm like, but you are too close to this problem. I'm meant to be further back, further objective, and also specifically talking to users in the process, like involving people so that I can, it's like a really big thing about empathy. Anyway, I think that project management somehow ties into this, because project management is basically about facilitating a project from being, something that a sponsor or stakeholder wants, and making sure that all the stakeholders actually get what they need, and that it is delivered to the best of its ability within the budget. And it's just less creative in a literal sense, but it's creative in the terms of like, I don't know, I feel like I like people a lot more than I realized in my 20s. And so the creative part is like, how do I get people to work together well without it being like painful?
Midlife social butterfly.
Not
Oh,
even
no,
close
you-
to my mid. Don't make me
Yeah,
seem
I was gonna say no. I was thinking from my own point of view. If I was saying that, I would probably call it that because I'm probably way past the middle. But
no.
no, I'm joking.
Yeah, so I know it's just like a really roundabout way of trying to answer that question, but so I got to project management because I kind of wanted something where I could solve problems for work, but it didn't have to be like the same level of pressure that where I could like come home and work on like content or cosplay or art or whatever, and that was where my real creative output was, but I didn't have to place my monetary or like social currency or value on those creative things.
Absolutely.
Like constantly justifying my art to somebody else in a work sense was a bit draining.
I can so empathize with that. Yeah. Like there's so much
Oh,
self-worth that you tie into what you do, and there's so much like, yeah, also in what you get out of it. Like ultimately, if you're doing something artistic full time and it's not working out financially, like in a huge sense, and you're always like you said, struggling, and you have to justify it to other people. It's
yeah. And the
and you
other
end
thing I
up,
found was with my
yeah.
course, I was really good at it. Like I got high distinctions in most of my stuff. Like yeah, a lot of it is common sense, but it's kind of wild how many people in my course didn't have that. I got like a 94 or something in one of my exams and it was like a cost, like it was maths. I'm not good at maths. I did really bad at maths in school, but the types of maths that they needed us to do for this is very simple.
Okay. Wait, you say you're
Okay.
not good at maths. What do you think is your strength that made you good at these things, or that makes you like outside of feeling that you like people a lot more than you
Um, I feel like
thought?
when I was doing the course, I had all my experience because, like, even though I wasn't project managing, there is project management involved in working on game development. Even if your role isn't like, I would say game dev, a project manager's role would be called producer, right? I think producer is actually the type of role that is project management, but in a creative field. So if you're in like any arts, if you're doing film or TV or game, producer would be essentially that role. It's just that context is different. But then in like a corporate or government or IT or whatever, it's project management. And you sort of deal with parts of that role, especially what I found like in my professional way, my professional experience. What I would be doing is making up for, because there was never enough staff. I was in like really small businesses where I had to like compensate, and was doing a lot of skills and upskilling myself. So once I actually just like came to an isolated experience of like trying to learn more about this, I was like, oh, okay, this is just like a formalizing a bunch of concepts I already understood. Like I'd already done budgeting and contracting with people, because
Ah,
I used to work for like Twitch's subsidiary in Australia, and used to like do sponsored content. I did that for most of 2019. And I would like contract Twitch partners in Australia and New Zealand for like sponsored content for brands like Samsung or charities or like insurance even. We did a sponsored thing for Sour Patch Kids. Like
that's so cool.
yeah. So what I found was that there's project management in pretty much any job, but being able to formalize the processes and have like a whole bunch of terms and ways to discuss it in a way that made me feel a lot more confident in my skills. And that's why I did the course. And I finished it. It was only 6 months because I didn't want to do a full master's program. So I just did like 4 courses at one of the universities in Sydney. And I like considered doing the master's thing. There were also like separate certificate programs that I could have done, but it felt like more reputable to do like a postgraduate certificate than to get like a separate certificate through like a it's like a lower, like the way that I got my UX design stuff, which wasn't bad. It's just different, I think. Kind of missed uni too. I liked going back to uni. But I actually hated the experience of the academic side of doing project management at uni. That's why I'm not doing my master's.
Okay. So
I
you
had
like
to write an essay at the
the
end.
actual
And I was
job,
like,
yeah.
the essay that I had to write was awful. It's not how I want to write academically. I think if I go back and actually do masters or PhD, I'm going to do something really wanky and really like about the olfactory something or other in romantic literature of whenever. Like that just went viral on Twitter if you saw. Um, this
No, I
poor
didn't.
woman was having a PhD massacred and saying that, you know, the government shouldn't subsidize this, which they didn't because no one gets subsidized for doing a PhD. And you write about really niche stuff to do a PhD. And I was like, yeah, I think I'd rather write on something I'm super passionate about that I get to spend more time in like analysis and critical thinking than project management's academic approaches are very like scientific method based. They want to do statistics and analysis of previous projects that existed with a hypothesis that they want to test.
All right. Okay. Yeah, I can see how that is
It's dull to
maybe not
write
the
or read
most fun
about.
thing.
It
Yeah,
is so
absolutely.
dull. I found that like reading between 15 and 20 readings to try and write this essay, and I found that like the types and ways of the language did not vary that much. There was not that much voice in it, which I mean one of my undergrads was in creative writing, so it was
Hmm.
quite a twist for me.
I've always struggled with writing. I mean, sometimes you feel like you really have something to say and then it's easy to bring it to paper, but when you have these forced assignments to write about something that, like you say, you're not like super passionate about by yourself, but it's sort of given to you as a task, it can be so hard to force yourself to do good work. I was curious. I myself am doing an apprenticeship at the moment, and I'm going to become an app developer with a focus on accessibility. And specifically for accessibility, there's these 4 key principles or areas that they define in the. They always say the WCAG, but it's like the WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, defined
Oh,
by
I've
the
seen that, yeah.
World Wide Web Consortium, or however you say that in English. And so they have these 4 principles where they want content or applications to be, what do you say, poor, POUR. So perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust, where
Mm.
perceivable pertains to things such as color contrast and font size. Operable means that, you know, you have like functioning controls, and understandable means that the logical structure of the site works or of the application, and robust means that it's like downwards compatible with older software or like
Mm.
crazy hardware or whatever, if a driver doesn't work or something like that. I can't come up with a good example for that one. So I was wondering, are there like some easy to understand and communicate or transport key principles of best practices like UX or UI design, just to help me and the audience understand a little bit more about
About
the
accessibility?
sort of mindset with which you have to approach that stuff? Or yeah,
Um,
similar to what I just said about accessibility, but then in UX and UI design, like so it's just
so yeah, like
some
with
thinking frameworks, I guess.
it's a, I think the biggest thing about UX, and I do want to say that UX and UI are not interchangeable. People want them to be because then they only have to hire one person. but you shouldn't. You would be much better off if you
So
hired
they
somebody who
okay.
specialized in UX, because then they would be able to use their full 40 hours a week on the UX process, which is quite different from producing a set of like art, interactable art designs, which are what you would call a UI, right? A user interface is like buttons and interactions and things. Whereas UX, particularly in any kind of digital UX, has more than just what you're clicking. In fact, like my favorite way of understanding what UX is like thinking about what's happening inside your user's head while they're using what you've made, and going, well, where are they going to look next? What are they going to click on? What are they going to interact with? And making sure that the process of trying to figure that out has as little friction as possible. So friction being something that interrupts that. Me trying to figure out what to do with my trial
Yeah.
interactable item and going, I can't do anything with this. Oh, I'm not actually meant to. I'm not meant. It's supposed to sit in my inventory. I'm supposed to click here and then I'm gonna put it. Like none of that was very clear to me from the hints that the game gave me. I mean, there's plenty of times where I've understood exactly what Path of Exile wanted me to do, but there are just as many times where I've been like, you didn't give me enough instructions, and I think that really simple changes would have made that. But I find there's another issue with UX design is that people always think they can do it better than you can. And the first thing that they do is come up with a solution without correctly identifying what their problem is. And I don't like talking to users about solutions. I like talking to them about their problems and really nailing down what that problem statement is. That's definitely jargon, a problem statement, so that I can solve that for them and then test it with them. So that again, you're talking about biases and objectivity. The same issue for the game designer who is too close to his design to see what the user's problem is the same issue that the user has who's too close to their problem to see what the design issue is.
I see. Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway,
Oh,
let's link this back to accessibility. My like recurring thing is empathy, and I put myself in my grandmother's shoes. Unfortunately, she passed away a couple months ago. But she struggled greatly with any kind of interactable, right? She just did not understand what she was trying to do because everything that she was looking at isn't tangible to her, especially with the way that touchscreens are now dominant. There's actually even a physical design flaw that disadvantages senior users because the way that touchscreens work, I'm sorry, I'm going to stutter. It measures the moisture content in your skin when you touch the screen. And
oh, that's how that works.
older
All of
people
them,
have,
or
yeah, older people have drier hands and their touches are not registered.
oh, okay. I
So
never knew that.
that is a lack of accessibility that is not even to do with the UI, period. It's actually the design of the product that is the flaw.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't. It's not even something that you can take into account from a like app development perspective for those devices. It's like a device issue.
Yeah, it's the technology that exists is inherently shutting out older users.
I wonder. I
And
need to look into that because with the new guidelines and the new laws, and especially like what I know is just the European Union and specifically the Germany situation, right? But that we have like very very complicated norms. I just did a presentation on that a while ago, where like stuff like bank terminals, for example, for picking up money and for getting bank statements, it's very very clearly defined, like how far into the wall is the display allowed to be, how far out of the wall is the keyboard allowed to be, how much newton of force do you need to press a button with so that a button press is registered as such, how much leg space and toe space needs to be underneath the device and all that. It's very very clearly regulated in norms and laws. And I wonder like whether that moisture content in your fingers in order for a touch to be registered is also something that's regulated in there, because I would imagine it
I
to
don't
be.
think it's a limit of the technology, and I do think that there are people working on ways to do it. But I think the issue they came into is that with the level, and I haven't researched deeply, but the level of like clarity that we have from OLED screens is part of the issue. Like trying to create a surface that is like easy to clear to see through, and then the pixels underneath it being like high resolution has been like one of the higher priorities of all the people developing these types of tech, that the like way that we engage is different. So do you remember like Palm Pilot era? um
Palm Pilot? Oh, Palm,
it
yeah.
like the handheld Palm Pilots and the touchscreen element, it was much more pressure based. Do you remember?
I
If
never
you were
used
to
one of those.
Okay, so those types of the way those types of interactive screens worked was much more based on pressure than moisture content, and anyone can produce pressure. But then there are other accessibility issues that come with pressure, because some people can't maintain pressure in their hands because of injuries and things, or disabilities, or like may not have like the same type of hand that we have because of like a defect or something.
Absolutely.
Accessibility is, I think, a pet peeve on, or like a pet way of thinking about accessibility is usually about colorblindness, because it's quite common. But there are so many diverse ways in which somebody can become inaccessible, or something can
Yeah,
become inaccessible.
absolutely.
That
No,
it's,
there, I,
yeah, it's
yeah.
empathy and keeping your mind open, I think. But there are people who specialize specifically in accessibility. I said that twice. That's so silly of me. But yeah, there are accessibility design specialists
But it's
who,
definitely an aspect of your studies or your professional experience that you had to go into because you're able to say so much about it.
yeah, but it's also because I'm an empathetic person, and I like, I think the other thing is that the minute somebody corrects me on something, I will never not remember that. And so if somebody was to say, this isn't right because of this, and the reason is because it then negatively impacts someone else, I will just never not think about that, and then that like list of things just kind of like racks up in my head of like, well, okay, but this person needs this, and then this type of a person needs that, and so on and so forth.
Does that ever feel restrictive?
It's like a puzzle you have to solve. It's like okay, well, we have to increase, and then there's a certain point where you go, well, I can't get all of this right all at once, but if I get as much of it right as possible first, and then I can work more directly with somebody on it again to really like understand how this problem affects them, you have an opportunity, really. But I think the way of thinking of it isn't about restrictive or like lack of creativity. It's about learning more about the restriction that you're being imposed with. And usually, like in terms of accessibility or people, it's always about understanding them better. And it also
Yeah,
helps you understand yourself.
absolutely. No, but also if you create things accessible, if you create them with people with restrictions or disabilities in mind, then you tend to make them better for everyone. Is something that I learned.
Oh,
Is
yes. I think I want to jump the gun on a question that's in your list of questions.
go for it. I feel like we need to move on at some point, and we won't be able to like go into detail on every single one of those questions plus the resulting follow-ups. So
Oh, it's
you feel free
okay.
to cherry pick.
So one of the like best examples of UX design, there's actually I didn't even learn this because it was when I did my UX course, it was like UX not in game design, and I had to like transpose it to the game design context. This guy made a video about like understanding UX better from the perspective of a player and trying to talk to other people about it. And I'll find it and link it to you later. But his example of the best solution, because I think that was a question you had, was when Mario was becoming a 3D world that you could walk around in, and they kept coming into this issue with playtesting where like users couldn't figure out how to jump over this hole. And they kept saying the issue was with the control scheme. And the solution was actually to add drop shadow so that they could gauge the height from which they were jumping.
Okay.
And I think it's one of the best ways to illustrate that UX design is more than just a menu screen. Because they wouldn't have known what the problem was if they didn't talk to users, but their users could not articulate what the problem was and were jumping to solutions by talking about, well, the control is the problem. And the issue wasn't actually control, it was about perception.
Yeah, it was the visual feedback of your character's position on screen,
and
basically.
that literally changed like everything about game design in 3D space. And now that's something we see in every game. Every game. We would expect to see it. It's probably part of like Unreal at a basic level. Because now light source is just a whole element of game design, which means that like a 3D object in space will always have a drop shadow. Unless like, exceptions are written in or whatever. But that wouldn't have happened
nowadays it's implemented in the engine to begin with. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, right? Like, isn't that a really cool example of UX design?
I honestly, like, without the entire introduction and you giving the context, I would have, if I was presented with that thing alone, wouldn't even have realized that that's UX design. I would be like, yeah, that's just game.
In the process
things.
of figuring out how to solve that problem would have been about like deep thinking and talking to users and really understanding what their problem was. And that's the part that's missing from a lot of development processes, which sucks.
So literally every area of game design that produces something, and I think that's probably every area of game design that produces something that the user gets into context with, has an overlap with UX.
Yeah, but it's a lot of responsibility, and also, like I said, there is definitely space and is done by game developers and game designers to empathize with their player and try and solve that problem. It's just it's harder when that's not your entire responsibility.
Absolutely, I get it. Like
It's
similar
again the
to
same
the
issue.
accessibility thing with
Yeah.
in my company. Like everyone obviously needs to be aware of accessibility and needs to work to accommodate that, but at the same time they can't be aware of everything, and there is
Yeah.
one person that is absolutely responsible to check everyone on that and
Yeah.
deliver feedback specifically on that accessibility aspect, but then that person also needs to know aspects of the other people's work.
Yeah, which
And now
makes
I
it
get
all
also
about
what you
collaboration.
yeah, which makes me again understand how you compared it to project management and like how is it's similar, because you have to have this sort of helicopter vision where you need to be aware of what everyone is doing so you can coordinate and orchestrate and like give people what they need to work with so that they work towards your goal in the end.
Yeah, and I think the best thing about project management is like, well, my role as a user experience designer was to be the advocate for the user. In order to do that, I had to empathize with them. If project
Okay.
management, my role is to be a champion of the project.
Yeah.
So the term project management, because it has the word manager in it, or management, people will like to think of it as a boss role. But I am not the boss of anyone. The people that I would be working with would be reporting to other managers. I'm the boss of
Right.
the project, which means that
Yeah.
I need to like appeal to them rather than order them to do something.
So wait, as a UX
It's
person, you're serving the user, and as a project management person, what do you say? You're serving the project, or is it like
you
some
serve
sort
the
of
project,
abstract
the
person, like the
purpose.
personification of efficiency, or
No, you serve the project, because the difference between project design and any other, like project management, sorry, and like what I would call business as usual is that the project is a unique circumstance that has an end date, like it has a finish. And the way that they go about solving this project and producing that solution won't be repeatable. It's like why construction is a good example. So if you wanted to build a really big bridge, if you wanted to build Sydney Harbour Bridge, You're not going to build Sydney Harbour Bridge twice. So that's a project, right?
Okay.
The way that you go about making Sydney Harbour Bridge is going to be different from the way that you go about making any other bridge. But because you made Sydney Harbour Bridge, you could probably go on to make other bridges. The circumstances would be different. The way that you go about the project would be different, but there would be similarities. I think game design is similar to that because every game is different. And even like every update is different. The similarity that game design shares with IT is that iterative nature. Like, well, it's a live service or it's a product that's always available to people and we may want to make it better. So, you know,
Right.
like we got it to the best of our abilities here, but we've had some more time to work on it, so here's more kind of thing. I've kind of circled away from your topics though.
No, but I mean, they were just starting points to, like I said, they're
But
neither
it was
a
cool
list
that
of.
you could see why project management appealed to me because of why UX design appealed to me, because they are. I love macro views of everything. I love macro and I love making the part, like understanding all the different parts and making sure that they're like working as intended. And I think that applies to both fields.
So you would also like engineering?
No, because that would be how the parts are doing it, not why.
Okay. Right.
I mean, I like knowing how things work, but I find that I get bored of, like, specifically the mechanics. What I like more is the problems of their interactions.
Okay. And I guess like the human component, like you said, you like people more than you realized, and you probably wouldn't
Yeah.
like electronic components as much as people because they're more exciting to
I'm
work
trying
with.
to become more knowledgeable about like IT things because I feel like that's a gap and it will probably help me to talk to IT professionals. But I'm really good at listening to people info dump on their favorite thing, and a lot of engineers and IT people and software and cyber and all that will just talk at you for a while about this thing that they're really knowledgeable about, and I'll be like, I'm very interested in what you're saying, but I also don't understand it as well as you do. So I'll just listen. And then at the end, I'll be like, so what's the thing that we're working on? And how do you make sure that it's working? Like, do you need something from me? Do I need to get it from someone else? Like, see how it's like, oh, okay, like you're doing your thing and you love that thing. And I love that you love that thing. And I just want to know how I can help you do it better.
That's so cool. Man, I really hope that you get like a good chance to pursue that in a satisfying way in Australia in the situation
In the new year,
where
I'm
you
pretty
said,
excited about job hunting. I haven't been before, but I feel a lot more confident than I was before.
I think you can. You sound very knowledgeable about the topic at hand. And I'd be curious to see some of your work. But yeah, no, that's. Thank you so much for taking the time to think about these things and put them into words. I always feel like, especially, yeah, explaining that to someone who doesn't share the same background, or I mean, even from a different language, or from a different continent and all that, and probably speak weird English to
No,
you.
no, it doesn't bother me at all. I love talking to people with different accents and different ways of thinking because then you get to think about how your way of thinking works. Like my course had a lot of international students in it, and they were really, really like generous with sharing the way that they thought about things or how they would approach problems because they have different approaches. Like a lot of different people in my course were from like India or like parts around India, like Pakistan and Bangladesh. But also people from like there was a guy from Poland and stuff, and they just had very different approaches to understanding things. And the Polish guy wanted to challenge everything, but he was also like, I'm an anarchist. Like he would say that outright, I'm an anarchist, I don't believe in this kind of stuff. And he wanted to argue with how the courses were being taught, but the way that he would talk about things would just sound argumentative without challenging it. Like we would be in the costing course and he would be arguing with the like premise of a problem that was presented to us, and I was like, no, we're just being asked to use a tool in this context. we don't need to argue with the context
Yeah.
because the course that we're doing right now isn't about that context. It's about how do we use the tool. And I was like able to see the frameworks, and he was able to see the frameworks as well, but he wanted to argue with them. And I was like, I agree with you, but at the same time, like what we need to do to get this done is different.
Yeah, no, like I can totally see what you mean with it. It definitely enriches you, and it helps you, like you said, learn yourself better if you learn how other people operate and understand things. But I just also appreciate that it can take a lot of energy and can be more exhausting than to talk to people who already know and where it's a comfort zone. So how can we tie this into Path of Exile? Is there any because you played Path of Exile way before you got into that stuff, right? When did you start playing Path of Exile? You've been playing for a decade.
No, not quite a decade. I started playing in 2017, I think. My
that's
first
almost
league
a
was
decade.
2.6, so Legacy League. I'm actually very
Prior
grateful.
to Fall of
Yeah,
Aria, that's huge.
yeah. So I got to play the version of the game where you had to play through 3 times, and I'm really proud that I got to be part of that history of the game. Because I also remember like joining the game and being like, oh, I've missed, like all of the 1.0 era and most of the 2.0 era, and everybody was gushing about Breach League, and I was like, shit, I'm late. Like, and now I've been part of like 25, 26 updates and PoE2. Like, that's crazy, right? And how do I tie it in? I don't know how to even answer this question. I started playing Path of Exile, and I found that not only is the game like, I guess, because I was quite new to video games, like period. And this was, I don't know, I was playing this to try and understand somebody in my life better, and have something in common with them.
Right.
And I was like, there's so much about this that doesn't feel intuitive to me. Like, I think what I found with UX, and like, I just found that with a lot of video games too, like, it wasn't just Path of Exile. A good example would be like Skyrim. I was playing Skyrim, and I didn't understand about like how they indicated pathing in the world with the like lighter gray area or like footpath, like cobblestones or whatever, and like they want you to follow that, but it's implied, it's not directed. And I think there was a point where you're going to
I'm just
climb up.
nodding because you're explaining it well, and I understand what you're saying, but I just want you to know that I've never played Skyrim, so like just
I'm not going to
for
spoil
context.
anything because I didn't get that far. But there's
Or
this
the other
big
way around, to
mountain.
just give more context.
Okay, so like
if
Skyrim,
in doubt.
the Elder Scrolls Skyrim is like a fantasy world where you have like dragons and stuff, and I think you got to join a faction, and I don't really know what the goal was, but you're just kind of in this world interacting. Because I never got that far. But my problem was pretty simple. Essentially, I think it wanted me to climb a mountain, and there was like a map that said like the thing I need to get to is the top of this mountain. But what I missed was that I was meant to follow this path up there, and I walked through the trees around the mountain and realized that you can't scale the mountain from any angle. You have to walk up the path. And I was like, I mean, why can't I climb up this rock face? Like, I just didn't understand how I would be directed around a game. And I think that kind of lack of what I would call game context knowledge and how games are made it harder for me to interact with PoE, because even if you'd never played PoE but you had played any ARPG,
Right.
Diablo, whatever, there was this overarching context that I was missing, which was
Yeah.
like, okay, well, like, a really good example is that everyone that I know who's picked up the game since I started playing it didn't know that they needed their skills to be linked, and that supports go on to the skill itself. And they
Right.
had to be told that the sockets not having links meant that they're not talking to each other.
Right.
And
And then
that
when
you
they
need to use
understand that
currency to do that. And
Okay.
no one I know who has started picking up the game after I started playing it has figured that out implicitly. Had to be told explicitly by me or someone else.
Okay. I'm trying.
So can I link this
Yeah.
back to UX design? So I think the best kinds of UX design is something that you don't notice. So being told something explicitly is not a good example of UX design. But being led to that conclusion in a way that you don't notice, but just happens because it's the logical step to take, is good UX design. It's brilliant UX design because it's not visible.
Like the show don't tell principle in storytelling and movie
Very
writing
much.
kind of, yeah.
Very much.
So you don't want a character to spell it out on screen, but you want it to become clear from the context and from the actions depicted rather than
Yeah.
it being explicit.
Yeah, like the biggest thing, one of the discussion points on like how to get people into PoE1 in the old days before PoE2 came out, like 2 weeks ago, was like we need a tutorial. And I was like, I think a tutorial in PoE1 would be heavy-handed and awful. And the example of the tutorial that exists in the game, it's okay. It's not great. But it's directive, you know, like it's instructional. It doesn't feel very immersive. It feels like, I think the thing that sucks about tutorials in video games if they're done badly is that they draw your attention to the fact that you're in a video game.
Yeah, and by extension in a tutorial. Like you're very aware that this is the tutorial portion. But just to be clear, you were still exclusively talking about Path of Exile 1 and its tutorial right now. Or is that
Yeah.
already... How...
I don't know that I feel that I'm a poisoned well trying to discuss that topic with PoE2 because I know how PoE1 works. So I've been finding it really interesting to watch other people play it, who have like that lack that context.
I find that super cool that you're also so aware that you're like not able to take PoE2 at its face value because you're biased because of the PoE1 context, and you kind of, without knowing the full context of everything in PoE2, you always take singular facts and put them into the context of PoE1 and judge them based on that.
Yeah.
Because that's something I observe all the time.
But I was also really excited about it because I remember going into PoE1 and I was so acutely aware of my lack of knowledge, and it made me feel like genuinely like inferior to people that I met, like other players. Like it's a really visceral experience. I can actually feel it in my chest, of like not knowing enough and not being able to, like, not having value because I didn't know that thing. And like that's still the case in PoE2, but I feel that I can shrug it off a bit better because we're all new. And there's already people who are like so far into the game and they have such great knowledge and they really get how it works. But I'm also just like, I'm happy with my really shitty tree that is just what I've been able to pick, and it does some purpose, and I'm making my way through the game. And there's just some things I'll never know that well that other people will.
Well,
But
I mean,
feel
other
like,
people put way more time into playing the game, and they also play it in a certain efficient way. I just always feel like, because I've also felt that like sort of fear of missing out of, I don't know, I need to be in maps by the end of the first weekend or something like that to be able to be one of the whatever. And it's just, I try to, like you said, shrug it off just by being like, hey, there's only one time you get to experience a game start. And
Yes.
don't
Oh my God.
ruin it with the idea of how it has to be. Just immerse in the
Yeah.
experience and play the game.
No, the whole time that I've been playing PoE2, I've been trying to remind myself of my first time playing PoE1, and I was playing PoE1 when I wasn't a streamer. Like, I was streaming, but I wasn't streaming that game. And so I was
Right.
playing it by myself. And
In your own time, yeah.
in my own time, and I was brute forcing my way through the first 4 acts over and over and over again. And I like I didn't have linked skills, and I didn't have a build planned, and I didn't have good gear, but you know, I was making my way through and just experiencing the game. And like I think PoE2 has been such a delight by contrast, because I know what to look for. Like, I think the emphasis on all the boss fights in the different areas, everywhere you go there's a boss fight, but you're also just dealing with mobs to get there, right? And every time you enter into a boss fight, the design is so clear that I don't care that I die like a couple times, 1 or 2 times, 10 times to a dude, because I know there's a solution to this problem. And I know that there's information that I haven't seen, because there's a few things happening on screen at once. So I'm getting this piece of information and this piece of information. I did Balbala, I think,
Balbala,
in
yeah.
Act 2. And sorry if this is a spoiler warning. There's
We're 2 weeks in.
Nope, this is for YouTube. My spoiler
Fair
warning
enough.
is for YouTube. There's like a green gas that comes out, and I could not for the life of me figure out how to not die to it. It was happening sometimes and not other times, and it really, like, I managed to finish the fight after a few times of failing, and my chat had to tell me. I was like, I don't know what the solution is to this problem. Like, I know I've solved it because I got through it several times, but there were other times where I died to it, and I think it was just chance that I was like doing the right thing, and they had to tell me, all right. And I'm not going to say what the solution is, because I think it's more fun for other people to figure it out. But I think that's also one of the examples of like not quite having the right level of feedback in the game so that you know when you're getting it right. Like sometimes, you know, like, who is it? There's an earlier boss fight where they have like a circle, and they're like, it's really simple because a lot of the time you need to go away from whatever the circle is that they're creating. But sometimes there's times we
The
have to
first
stay in it.
version of Durandus, where he does that lightning slam on the ground, and it's an expanding circle. In the middle is a contracting circle. You need to stand
Yeah.
in the middle, like sort of a donut.
Yes, that guy. Yeah.
That's
So-
how I died. I actually started in hardcore, right?
Yeah.
And I did complete Act 1 deathless, and I got to Act 2 to that guy, and I ran away from the center when the circle came because it spawns so late into the
You
animation.
did all of Act 1 Deathless?
I had the benefit of having played before a little bit at Gamescom and stuff. Right, so I knew the boss, and I had already like tried the Act 1 boss, Count Geonor, on Mercenary on the same build that I played, more or less. Except when I tried it at Gamescom, I had the pre-made build, which was obviously worse than when I league started and over-farmed for it. So, yeah, credit where credit is due. I knew too much. But,
Yeah, actually, I demoed the game a couple times at ExileCon, and I never made enough progress, because was it the case for when you went to Gamescom that they still had the difficulty even higher than it is now? Because that was definitely the case at ExileCon.
I don't know whether they changed the balancing or whether it's just the inherent weaknesses of the pre-made characters, because it's very hard for them to make a pre-made character that is representative of like the power level that you should have or that you will have there if you naturally get to the point. That's what I think.
Our stream together chat has stopped being together.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, let's figure that out. That seems to be...
I'm so sorry to draw attention to it, but I just
No,
realized...
that's fine. Like I also realized there hasn't been a lot of messages, so this is a welcome little interjection, and then afterwards we can figure out where we left off. But I have no idea what happened, so give me a second.
Perhaps
I thought I
you
had it
left.
open here in Mozilla. Thanks for hosting. Stream together has ended. Why? Why has it ended? Why Twitch?
Sometimes it
Why?
does that. I think it happened to
Okay,
me
I'll
yesterday.
I just invite you again, and
No worries.
send invite. Should be out. Can I already press start sharing chat?
Freaking out because I have like 2 windows open. Okay, we're good. I can see it.
Okay, then that means I
think you
will
just-
see it in a moment as well.
Okay, got it.
So where were we? Durandus, expanding circles, hardcore,
And,
having played. Did you go to both ExileCons?
Yes, I did.
Obviously, if you're right
I
around the corner.
paid
Why would
though.
you not?
I was not invited,
Yeah,
but
yeah, no,
it's
like, yeah, true.
it's so close. I could never say no, even though the ticket price is a little insane for me right now. It wasn't at the time that I bought my tickets.
Yeah, I wish I could have gone, but like, no, I also underestimated. Like, even from Australia to New Zealand, it's still like a decent amount of travel costs and accommodation and stuff, right? Or do you have
Um,
relatives or friends there where you can couch surf?
no, I do have friends there. People I've met through Twitch mostly. But they are like some of my favorite people in the world live there. But I think it's more that it's actually cheaper for me to fly to New Zealand than it is for me to fly Perth, which is on the opposite side of Australia. Which
Right.
is like, for permit me to swear, but that's fucking crazy.
Well, I
To
mean,
like
you're
leave my
traversing an entire
country,
continent.
but I'm going over an ocean.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, so the thing with traveling in Australia is that to leave our country, you're always going overseas, which is interesting, like for us, because for you, you can hop a border and be in like 3 different countries or 4 different countries at one time,
Yeah,
and it
absolutely.
would take you like what, like a couple hours driving.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
And in Australia, you can drive for hours and not leave the country.
could drive for hours and not leave your state, which is also different from the US. Like you could drive for hours and be in a different state. And Australia and the US are almost comparable in terms of landmass.
Yeah, it's really messed up how the standard what do you call it, the Mercator projection world map like skews the ratio, and makes you think that it's not that big, but
Africa is
I've
so
seen.
massive.
Yeah,
Yeah, the
that's
Mercator
true.
projection is really interesting because of that.
No, but
And I
I
think
could
there was
also
an
like,
episode of The West Wing that told me about that too, which is an American TV show set
oh, I
in the
think I've
White
seen
House.
that scene. Yeah, I haven't seen the show obviously, but I think I've seen like someone post the clip on Twitter or somewhere. It's crazy. But yeah, I've also seen like montages of like, I think Germany being people trying to fit the surface area of Germany into Australia or into the United States and stuff like that. So I've seen the comparisons, and it's crazy. But what I was gonna say is like, I mean, I could also travel within Europe for further than I'd need to travel to go to Morocco in the north of Africa, for example, right? Like I could also go to a different continent that's closer than another point within the same continent.
I
So
just
that's why it
realized
didn't sound too outlandish to me. But
that's cat number 2, which is actually
oh,
cat number 1. And she has a big shaving patch on her belly.
oh, did she get
She's been
surgery or?
sick this week. She had an ultrasound, so they
Oh,
shaved
okay,
her belly so they could do that. And that's
that makes sense.
Sierra. That's cat number 2, actual cat number 2, but she appeared earlier.
Ah, right. So you introduced her as Cat One, right? Because it was the one I saw first.
Yes.
Cool.
Anyway, so Echo and Sierra. Sorry, just distract you, but it's Podcats. We gotta have cats on Podcats.
Don't apologize. I will not. I will not allow you to apologize for cats. I'm just a little bit antsy, but it's not a problem. I'm just very not practiced in this, and I want to make it as good as possible, and that's why I
These things
sometimes
get
maybe
better with
seem
time.
uneasy. But it's a little bit different from running Faded for me. Deep breath. Path of Exile. Right, you went to both ExileCons.
Yeah.
The first one was 2019, so you had been playing since 2017 already. How did your impression of Path of Exile 2 change between the first ExileCon and the second ExileCon? It was quite a shift, right? Because
It's like
the
4
second one was
years,
where we
right?
learned, yeah, the
That it
second one was
was
were separate game, exactly.
a separate game. So in the first one, we could only play Act 1 and only part of Act 1. And, you know, like it was the reveal that it was the sequel. It wasn't going to be Path of Exile 4, which, remember we were calling it Path of Exile 4.0?
Yeah, exactly.
And they even had that in their reveal thing, and then they said it's not 4.0, it's Path of Exile 2, the sequel. And I think, oh, if I go back a little bit, but like actually just being in the room for that announcement was electric. That was such a big announcement. But my impression of PoE2, I feel like last year the emphasis was really about the campaign. There was no concept or even discussion of endgame.
Right.
And then there was just like a throwaway comment almost. It wasn't throwaway. Like, it was just that. Because remember, they were originally going to be the same game to the same endgame? There were two different ways to level. And now they're individual games and they have their own endgame, but they didn't talk about what that was going to be or what that would look like because they didn't know. And it wasn't until the launch trailer, like a launch announcement stream for this like early access, that they even said, oh, instead of doing the rest of the campaign, we spent a bunch of time developing endgame. So for me, I feel like that's actually the more violent shift. Because being told that there were separate games didn't have any kind of any kind of implications to me without knowing what that would look like in practice, right? Before it felt like a bit experimental and a bit like unrealistic, but like, oh, you know, like what else were we meant to picture, right? And now we actually have something to picture. It feels like the change between 2019 and now for me is a bigger deal than the change between 2019 and 2023. Having said that, there's like a whole like bunch of things that we were talking about in 2019 that have changed again. Like in 2019, they revealed that we didn't have sockets on gear, and the way that skills worked were really different, right? And then they've worked on that and iterated that, and now you have like the way that skills work now in PoE2. I feel like I didn't really understand or conceive of, I guess, how much less types of things we would have to do with our gear and our crafting and what currencies would occur until I was actively playing the early access. It just didn't feel anywhere near as...
Barebone?
Yeah, like... The thing is that I have always described the demos as to be like Ruthless, but it's a new game.
Mm-hmm.
But Ruthless PoE1 still has all of that currency,
right.
Which means that the drop types and everything are all there. PoE2 is just like, it's actually stripped of clutter in a way that is really appreciated. I think in PoE2, the early game, we had more stuff and they've pulled more things out. Like in 2019, there was more of what was in PoE1.
Yeah.
And they've
clearly, I mean, if they're both designed to go into the same end game, and then PoE2 would be just a slight upgrade from PoE1 to 4.0, bigger than previous upgrades, but still just an upgrade.
I don't know if I'm conveying it. Like, I'm a bit... So, ExileCon, for me, I didn't spend that much time playing. I probably should have. I did play. I played both times. But I also, like, suck. so I didn't get that far. Which I'm kind of glad about, because I actually am getting to have, like... I don't... Like, the way that they ran the little demo session so that you had, like, 45 minutes with it, I'm not fast enough to really experience something with 45 minutes. I think one of the things that sucked about the demo was, like, you couldn't see the skill tree. Like, period. I don't know if that was the case for you in Gamescom, but that was definitely the case with ExileCon in 2023. is that there was no skill tree, and it felt really weird to play through a character and not decide where my passives were going.
That was the
Because
case for Gamescom 2023, but this year obviously we had an early version of the skill tree. Although Jonathan always pointed out how, like, don't pay attention to what you get here or there. This is absolutely not final.
I mean, I got that, but at the same time, like it just felt like not like the experience of leveling your character up sucked because of that. There was no actual payoff.
Well, how many times did you level up during your 45 minutes?
I don't remember, but like the payoff is being able to put a freaking skill in the tree and being able to make that decision. Because otherwise, the only other meaningful upgrades were happening on gear, right? And like I said, it was ruthless. I would find white. Everything was white. I think I saw one magic item.
Yeah.
It was
Maybe a transmute
genuinely
or an
like being
alch.
ruthless, right? Like it was so hard to actually scale power. And so, like, I think that's the reason why early access is a bigger deal for me, because I've actually been able to spend enough time with it that I, in my very crappy player lifestyle, can actually play the game. Yeah.
I think it's all just a matter of like how much time you put into the game. Honestly, I don't think it's so much efficiency, but there's just these people who play like 16 hours a day for the first 2 weeks and can keep that up for some reason because they have this whole support system around them where their content gets made partially by other people and their laundry gets done and the food gets done and whatever. I don't know their arrangements, but I don't know.
I think it's different
I
from
can't do
person to
that.
person. I like the idea of the people who like go ahead and make a lot of meals for themselves so they can just grab stuff out of the fridge and heat it up.
Sure, meal prep is also a thing.
I watched Noogie stream like making some meals and stuff. He's so funny in the kitchen. I
Oh
was like,
man,
oh
yeah.
damn, he's wearing a little apron. And he was talking about how much he loves mushrooms, like in any kind of form. And I was like, that's so cute. I'm really into the mushrooms too. I have a little tattoo of mushrooms actually. And I didn't like mushrooms before I became a vegetarian.
Really?
But that's because my grandma kind of ruined them for me. She did this thing with them that you should never do to a mushroom. Poor
What did
mushrooms.
she do to your mushroom? Did she microwave them?
Uh-huh.
Really?
Uh-huh. She's a
Or
crime. She's committing crimes, man. Everything else she cooked was pretty yummy, edible, enjoyed. Mushrooms, a crime.
yeah, some things really like what I also hear a lot is eggplant. Like a lot of people don't like eggplant because they've never had it properly done because it
Oh,
always
I
becomes
love
like this
eggplant.
chewy, soggy mess. And but when you do it right with the roast aroma or like you even like make these fried
Char it.
eggplant cubes, yeah, it's so good. It has these
I will never
nutty
not
aromas.
picture, I think it's like MasterChef Australia. They would get like a hibachi and put the eggplant on top of the hibachi and char the eggplant and it would just do this like molten thing. And I was like, God, that's gonna taste good. I could see it.
Awesome.
Okay, we go back to PoE though, if you.
Yeah, if I can.
Oh,
Oh,
I
I
feel
mean,
like
is there something that you wanted to continue on, or should I pick a new
I
question?
I think there was earlier like a bit of an instance of a question that I don't think I fully answered, which was that because the game design of PoE was unintuitive to me, um, that's when I started questioning user experience design. Because it was a concept that I was really familiar with from CX, actually, from customer experience design. I did some work experience like 5 years prior to that.
Oh, right. So it fueled your motivation to do studies and to learn more in that field because it helped you understand your problems with Path of Exile.
I think what I found interesting about Path of Exile 1, the more I think about like the last couple of years of playing it, was less to do with the experience of gameplay and more to do with why the problems that people have with this game keep happening and why they're getting worse and how do I fix that. Like not from
Okay.
like an engineering point of view, like why are you having errors? It's more like where are these misunderstandings happening in someone's brain when they're experiencing the game? and how do you mitigate that? And I feel like PoE2 does a much better job of like actually, trying to understand what a player is trying to do when they're playing it. They like have done a lot of testing and stuff with users and trying to make sure that what they're doing is like actually achieving the task of the game. And they're so interested in feedback as well.
Just for context, where are you now in Path of Exile 2?
I haven't finished the Act 2 boss fight. I'm stuck on this like area that I have to go through, all like the little passageways just have the circles, and then I'm pretty sure the boss fight's on the other side of it. And it's the guy that we, like you said earlier, the guy whose name starts with a J, that we like hit. You hit him down to half, and then he runs away, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, he's the boss, I think. But I'm like, I'll pop into other people's streams and they'll be doing something, and I'll just be like trying not to take any notice of what they're doing, but just talking to them. I'm actually relatively unspoiled, which is okay. Like, I know when people are mapping, I kind of just don't absorb the information that they're doing, because I mean, mapping kind of looks the same no matter what game you're playing, really. You're just spamming your skill over and over and over again, or engaging in a boss fight.
Right, that's interesting that you say that. That's because that's a point that I definitely wanted to bring up, and I was going to introduce it in this way, where I feel like at the moment there's a lot of people who love PoE2 and a lot of people who hate PoE2, and I feel like that ties back to what we said earlier, where you have to free yourself of perceptions from PoE1 that you bring into PoE2, because if you judge, say, the drop rates of currency in PoE2 based on your expectation that was coined by PoE1, and you don't know the full context that those drop rates will have in PoE2, and like how the entire design accommodates those changes, then you're going to be unhappy with those. And I feel that there's some people who really would have wanted Path of Exile 2 to be the 4.0, to be that basically PoE1 but with better graphics and better systems and better accessibility, better tutorial, just make it better and replace PoE1. And then there is this other faction, and I think those are the people who predominantly enjoy PoE2. Those are the people who wanted to have a new game that is similar thematically and from the gameplay elements they know and the user interface and all that, but essentially provides a different experience.
I like what Jonathan said about it in, I think it was one of his interviews follow up from the launch announcement, where he said that he wants it to be the best ARPG that's ever existed. And the beauty of that goal is that he has all of the learnings of PoE1. And it's like, that goal, even though the way that he words it is aspirational, it talks about PoE2, it implies that PoE1 got stuff wrong.
Yeah, I mean, historically, GDG has been pretty good at admitting mistakes and like not.
No, I mean, like, in the same, like, PoE1, like, yeah, they fix stuff all the time. They make patches, they make changes. But at a certain point, there's, like, the core underlying structure of the game that is what it is. And if you dismantle any part of it, its identity will change. And that seems to be a fear that they have, which is part of the reason why PoE1 is now separate. And in some ways, like, PoE1 is a crazy success. Don't get me wrong. It's a great game. Obviously, we're all here because of it. But it sort of got stuff wrong. But it had to do those things to get those things wrong. And that's a huge achievement. And then you have this extra huge achievement, which is PoE2 on top of that. And they're the same title that come from the same company, and that's incredible.
So I take it you're in the camp, I want PoE2 to be distinctly different from PoE1.
Why have two separate games? Why have two separate games? You can have PoE 4.0. Like, that will happen.
like what I'm saying is like some people will want to PoE2 to be what PoE1 was, just with better graphics, and want to not play PoE1 anymore and let that die and play PoE2 instead. And other people
don't
want to be like,
see-
I don't want to play PoE1, I want PoE2, but I want it different because if otherwise it would be the same. Oh my god,
Nah,
I'm
it would,
so bad.
yeah, like you get 4. You will get 4. 4 will happen. That's like they now have all of this game engine design stuff. It's just a matter of putting people to work in order to upgrading PoE1 systems. They literally have done all the work. There's no reason why we don't get that eventually.
Eventually. So what are some prime systems, like prime things that you would want ported back from PE1? I guess we can take one away, like we're directly, we both agree there's no reason not to port it back, and that is the new character model and rigging and animation system, where they can just directly take that and plug that into PE1 and it will be fine.
That, and if you end up seeing that rigging and animation system coming back, then all of the skills will probably be reanimated as well, so that like the entire like concept of attacking that quickly. But I do think there will be conflicts because like Path of Exile 1 has that speed element that I don't know that this engine can facilitate in the same way. But I haven't seen high level gameplay, so like I haven't paid enough attention to how fast someone's moving or how fast they're attacking in endgame now. But I keep seeing Junk
I think you'd be surprised.
about it. They keep tweeting about it, right? And they keep saying like, oh, it's doing one hit for 140 million DPS, and I'm like, okay. I've never seen what that looked like anyway. Like that's just always been a video to me.
Yeah,
That's
MP
not my
had like
reality.
a post earlier on Twitter where he showed like some dash interaction where he like did definitely moved like 3 or 4 screens per second, so it was really fast.
I do want to stop and say that, like, the people who wanted PoE 4.0, like, I think that they are completely justified in wanting that because for you and I, we've tried the game, and we can see, like, we already had this prior knowledge of like how different it was going to be, but they may not have, or they may have only seen it, and when you see the video gameplay, you don't know what the buttons are that they're clicking, and you don't know like how much they're spamming that thing, like all you've got is like the visual experience, and the visual experience looks incredible, but you don't know what it feels like to play. And so I've had 5 years to know that this was going to feel like Ruthless with less stuff, but look beautiful and feel like everything that I could do, I would have a bit more time to make my choices. But not everyone has had that time to assimilate that knowledge. And you got to add into the context that we've been getting less and less PoE1 like leagues. Like there's just been a glut of content. I mean, they're still serving content, and like good on them for that, because I mean, obviously it is a bit of an elephant in this room, but I haven't been playing that much PoE1 over the last 2 years or so because I'm just kind of bored of the PoE1 loop. Like I said, I got more interested in the problems the game was experiencing in its like attempt to be a game than actually the playing of it. And while I've been bored of that game, I've been playing something wildly different, which is Overwatch 2. And the reason I mention this, please don't all just stop watching the video right now, is because Overwatch 2 had a 2-year drought where they experienced not a single update. Overwatch 1, sorry, while they were developing Overwatch 2. So the fact that we get anything over this time period is great. It's not as good as what we're used to, because we're used to 13-week leagues and having 4 updates a year. And it sucks that last year they announced that these games were going to be separate and they were going to have separate teams, and that both teams would be able to facilitate the cycles that we were expecting. And that they haven't been able to deliver on that promise so far. However, the expectation of the players to have 4.0 or this incredible 4.0 like experience is sorry, it makes sense because not only have you not tried the game before, but you've also not got a new league to play.
Okay.
Like, that expectation is completely reasonable. It sucks. I think people are really, like, completely justified in feeling disappointed. Because otherwise they just have to go back to PoE1 and play the same fucking season that's been there for, like, 3 months already, 4 months.
It's a good season, but yeah, I can see why that would suck. No, I totally get that, because I also feel that people have been feeling a little bit let down with PoE1 because it's been progressively, at least perceived as giving you less and less generous leagues in terms of currency output, in terms of build power, and in terms of new stuff to play with. I mean, the leagues themselves are more polished. Like Settlers is a really cool system. It has a lot of assets in there, a lot of, sounds and the whole town and stuff. But it ultimately feels a little thin compared to other stuff in the past where you really, like, a lot of people liked Harvest. I totally understand why that's not in the game anymore, and why why it had to go away. But for a lot of people, Harvest was the first league that they really played a lot, and that they really gained build understanding and a certain craving for power because they experienced that power for the first time, right? And we haven't had stuff like that. I mean, I guess Affliction was really powerful, but what I'm trying to
What
say
about,
is that
the one with the little bots that followed you around?
Sentinel,
Yes.
yeah, that was
People
crazy.
really liked that league.
Yeah, that one was a good one.
I think the thing is that people have a very distorted perception of each league. We've had some
Selective
real
memory.
bombers. Yeah, very, very much so. Like, Harvest has this crazy nostalgia attached to it because of the crafting potential. And listen, admittedly, that is very justified because what we were able to achieve in terms of deterministic crafting was unseen before. And the only thing that came close was what, like, starts with an S also, is blue.
Scourge?
Nope,
No,
it's blue.
blue. Wait, blue. So
Synthesis?
synthesis
Synthesis?
could be a
Yeah.
no. Wasn't synthesis yellow? Was it blue?
Synthesis is one with fractured things, right?
Yeah, the super old one before Legion.
Yeah. Yeah. So Synthesis was extremely nostalgic for people in terms of crafting, but they also didn't quite understand the system as well as they did Harvest. But I'm not nostalgic for Harvest because the fucking player interaction of actually killing those stupid little monsters and the fact that they were monsters and not plants drove me frigging insane because it didn't resemble a farming experience in the slightest. Like, it was just, sorry, but they called it Harvest and it was, what? It was, sorry, I'm mad about that. I've never
Wait, so
liked
you like the
Harvest.
farming aspect more than the fighting monsters aspect? But for me, it would be like, I always thought that the micromanagement of having to place the seeds all the time was terrible in Harvest after you got over the initial
I think
fascination
the
of
design
it.
of Harvest was flawed. Always had been. I think what they were designing and produced in Harvest would look much more like Factorio than Harvest, or a farming simulator, or anything resembling a farming simulator. Like, I think they've done a version of it. Oh god, I'm blanking on seasons or leagues, but I think, yeah, like where I'm going with this is that Harvest had a feature about it that made it awesome. That is so awesome that people are blind to its very glaring flaws. And
Okay.
the sadness that I have about the discussion of Harvest is that the thing they love about it, they've now started to think of as the reason that it's not existing. Like the amount of power you were able to generate about it. And I'm like, it was shitty design. I'm sorry. But like the actual gameplay loop of, put the thing in the station and go in and whack a bunch of monsters is a terrible design. Like, so dumb. Because the minute that you stripped out any of the, like, actual, like, creating of the Harvest environment, your gameplay mechanic is go in, whack monsters, and leave. And it's like, how different is that from mapping? It's not a unique interaction. Delving is a unique, like it's different. You had to get to the end of the path. Like there are other examples of game design where like there is maybe one thing that made it slightly different that changed the stakes of your experience. There weren't. I think the thing that happened with Harvest is they stripped the high stakes out of it, unless you're in hardcore. Like the fear of failure, or something like that. I mean, not in the same way. Like, wasn't there a point where like you wouldn't lose your item because you couldn't really lose your harvest experience? There would just be a point where you bricked it and you couldn't go back in because whatever monster you created had mods from your map that was going to kill you no matter what happened. It had reflect or something. I could be so wrong. Oh gosh, I'm really rusty.
I'm not sure I know exactly what you're referring to, but like with the original harvest, while like during the league, it was always in your hand because you had the seeds that you planted, so you were the person
Yeah,
to
so you could brick your
decide
own
what
thing,
monsters you put in there.
but the actual interaction of the crafting experience had no fear of failure. And therefore the payoff is not really there.
Oh, you mean that it was you could always save an item again because there was no fail state, so to say, in the
Yeah.
item creation process.
Yes. And it's sad because I'm probably gonna like YouTube's probably gonna kill me if they get this far in the thing. But like I think there should be a fail state in crafting, in not the same way that I think like deterministic crafting shouldn't exist, but I think the experience, the exciting experience of playing a game needs to have a point of failure. Not that deterministic crafting shouldn't exist, but that there should be stakes to your experience in any kind of gameplay interaction, whether it's crafting or anything else.
Yeah,
And if
obviously.
you remove
I mean,
the stakes, then the excitement is gone.
your success doesn't mean anything if there's no fail. To like as a
Yeah, and then to that end, like Harvest is just like a becomes a factory, right? Like there are so many other leagues that have proposed really interesting systems that also had a fail state, but they had other issues like the fact that it was just spam. Like fossil crafting was an interesting way to approach somewhat deterministic crafting, right?
yeah.
And fossils and the entire delve experience is quite a fun way to play the game, and it's very different from what you're doing in PoE, like in your day-to-day PoE experience, so that when you're doing that you go and do something and it's a bit of a break. So if you're like, I'm sick of this rhythm, I can go into this rhythm instead. And it still produced like a crafting feature that at some points has been very powerful. It's not anymore.
Specific use cases, but for the most part, yeah, it's not.
Yeah, so I think the issue ends up being that like what GGG does is they'll like create something that's really, really powerful, and then they go, oh, it's not that great, we need to strip the power from it, so all you end up doing is generating heaps of it so that you can just spam it until it eventually hits. That's been their way of tempering anything. Oh, the only way to really like measure, like really control how a player gets to have success out of this is that they have to produce heaps of it and then just get lucky. It's an emphasis towards RNG that I think is a disservice to the game.
Yeah, yeah, either get super lucky in few attempts or have so many attempts that you can rule out luck as a factor, basically, and brute force it over an unhealthy amount of attempts. So
But
by
I think-
contrast, yeah,
Yeah, you were gonna go like by contrast Path of Exile 2, right?
Yeah.
I am not sure yet because I haven't crafted enough. And I'm playing Trade League, and I've actually got to a point where in my previous experience of PoE1, I've definitely played Solo Self-Found several times, and I've liked the crafting experiences and learning about different crafting systems. In PoE2, I want to play Solo Self-Found, and I know that when people discuss the design of any PoE, there is this overarching like paradigm or assumption that solo self-found is a more difficult way of engaging with the game. But I think that the game system should function in a solo self-found environment, and that trading should be a perk from playing in softcore trade or playing in hardcore trade, but that you should be able to make your own meaningful upgrades. But I feel like
Right.
instead the game design balance is always around trade because trade exists. And the reason I mention this is because I've been able to play PoE1 and been able to make mostly meaningful progress in the game. But I find that I had to resort to trade because I simply didn't get lucky enough with PoE2 so far. Not a lot of trade, but it's the only way I can get gear that has any mods that are worth having. Because I think the issue is you don't have any like I can't alt roll an item, and the fact that I can't alt roll a magic item is like really pivotal for me. Like you can chaos roll something, but I don't have enough chaos to do that, so there's no reason I would.
Yeah.
So like there are other ways to engage with it, like I could buy from vendor or I could gamble on vendor, but I simply don't produce enough gold yet in my like campaign playthrough to really gamble with vendor. The price of gambling is quite high for like the way gambling works in terms of like gold level that you would experience, especially when you make so many mistakes on the passive skill tree that you need to like, I think just like the balance of gold in the game is a bit off for like the cost of
Absolutely.
things, particularly in campaign. I think there's a point in the game playthrough where it doesn't matter. Gold is immaterial to you. But it doesn't happen during like one of the more critical points of the game where you're like trying to retain a player because they need to feel like they can make meaningful choices and have some kind of power or autonomy.
Yeah, I think I get that. So just for context, like how many exalts and regals and all do you think you've found so
3
far?
exalts. I've probably found like maybe less than 10 regals. And for a really long time, I never had a single transmute. I'd get orgs, but no transmutes. It was great. I don't know if I'm really unlucky. Like, I killed something and I dropped a regal out of it, or an alk. I think it might have been my first alk, actually, that I've seen in the game. Like, I am picking up magic and rare items to sell to town vendor to get shards.
Yep. Yeah, I've done more disenchanting than I'd like to admit as well.
That's right,
For me,
disenchanting.
for me, it's always the regals that seem to be the bottleneck. Because I find so many like interesting bases from the vendors or from picking them up and looking at magic items or from picking up white bases and throwing my transmutes on
I
them
will
that there's
say,
always good two mods where I want to regal them, but I
yeah,
don't
the
have enough
vendor
regals.
bases are a bit stronger than they have been in PoE1. But again, price of gold, I can maybe buy one.
Yeah, I've also felt that during the campaign. Interesting adjacent topic because we just kind of touched on it. That the town cycle of vendoring things for various currencies you can get back, vendoring them for gold, and like doing, I think the only recipe left in the game, which is the 3-for-1 via the Reforge. Basically, even in four things, like the entire
Wait.
town.
What 3-for-1 exists? I didn't know there was a 3-for-1.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to spoil.
No,
It's
I
later.
want to know. Tell me.
All right. So you know how there's a salvage bench that you unlock in Act 1, so
Yeah.
you can salvage socket items for the socket currency
Yes.
and for the quality currencies on quality items. Yeah, later
Yeah.
on via a quest in Cruel, I believe, if I'm not wrong, because I haven't unlocked it myself yet. I need to go back and unlock it, but I've been busy with other stuff. You can unlock a bench where you can put 3 similar items and get like re-roll them into one. So you put like 3 blue
Oh my
pairs of
gosh, is
boots and you
that
get a
like
new one.
there was a league that was like that, wasn't it? It was like you could combine them?
Well, it's not recombination. It's basically just
It's
the
similar,
3-for-1
right?
recipe where you trade 3 rare items for a new rare item of the same base type. But it's not
Oh. I thought you were going to tell me that if I put 3 of something, I get the upgraded base, because I kind of miss that recipe. I need to
Oh, no,
upgrade
no,
my flasks more
that one, you
predictably,
mean like,
please.
okay, 3 medium flasks for a large life. I don't know whether it works like
I
that.
miss that. I miss that one.
I haven't done a lot of trying it out because I simply didn't unlock it myself. But I feel like now I'm where I'm in endgame and I have like a lot of, say, blue topaz rings that were just shit and not worth regaling. I would like to put all 3 in there and get a new blue topaz ring that maybe has mods that are worth regaling. Right?
No, actually, that sounds like a good thing to have in the game. I like that.
Yeah.
But again, it's all random. Like,
But what I was trying to get at is like vendoring socketed items for jewelers in Path of Exile 1, or vendoring quality items to get the quality currency, vendoring things for the other shards that you could get, and doing recipes. This would all happen via one vendor. And now you have these 4 different things that it's spread out to.
yeah.
Does it make the user experience better or does it make it worse? Like,
Okay,
because
so-
on the one hand, vendor recipes are really obscure to figure out for people in PoE1. That like
Yeah.
there is even a certain return for a specific combination of items. But then on the other hand, like having so many different things in town could also be overwhelming. So I'm curious what your perspective is on that.
My personal perspective is that I think so the way that I would look at it is I think it adds friction. I don't know that the friction that it adds is rewarding friction. Because it's not a puzzle to figure out. It's just that different points of reference are responsible for different things. I also think the Reforged bench is fucking dumb design, the way that it works. The fact that it's like a thing that you have to right click and then tap on your inventory rather than like something that you
Oh, the salvage bench. Yes, absolutely. I
That's
find it so dumb. Yeah.
like it doesn't like I understood how it worked, but I knew that what I was doing was wrong. It felt wrong the way that it
It
does.
feels like an unnecessary extra click. Why can't I not control click the thing and directly have it on my cursor? Why do I need to click the button on top of it?
Why is there a button, but why is the work that I'm doing happening in my inventory? Like, can we talk about how like location, like, I guess I know this is a PoE1 expectation, but I think it's actually a core game design expectation, because there's other types of games that also have benches. And whenever you're working on something in a bench, you put the item in the bench. If the item's in my inventory, it's not on the bench. It is a literal bench, but we're not
Wow.
using it.
I'm not that well versed in many different games because pretty much
So
the
I'm
only
thinking,
games I
like,
played in the past this decade were Last
Stardew
Epoch and
Valley
PoE.
and like
Yeah.
Graveyard Keeper and games like that, which have like crafting bench recipes, you put this plus this in thing, it spits out this. Like our crafting bench in PoE1, put thing in bench, and then pay currency, which combines the currency with the bench, and then spits out results. But it's happening in the bench, the object, right?
Yeah.
Whereas this is like, go to bench and click button, which we then do to inventory. Why would I, because if you think about how I would perform that in a 3D space, so I walked over to my desk, I picked up the hammer, and
Yeah.
then I whacked myself on my hip where my inventory is located.
Yeah.
Because my inventory might as well be like a belt, right?
Yeah.
Or a backpack. I'm whacking myself in my
Yeah,
backpack
on the back.
or my belt. Like the performance of that task is wrong. So it makes no sense in my head to be doing it that way in game. The interfaces are like at odds with each other.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely an aspect that I can understand is bad about it. In general, I would think, though, that it's more intuitive for people to figure out that you can do those things, right? Because PoE 1 like did a really bad job at telling you you can vendor so and so many quality items, right? That adds up to 40 quality for a quality currency.
Oh no,
And, like,
I'm
all these
specifically
obscure-
angry at the Reforge bench thing. Like, because of how that's designed. I don't know about your 3-to-1 UI at how it looks.
No, I'm referring to how it worked in PoE 1 to get quality currency from quality items, right? In PoE 2, you get the salvage thing, you click the hammer, which is dumb, but in at least it kind of is explained to you in the game, in a sort of tutorialized way. Whereas in PoE1, you didn't even know that if you had like 3 axes that had 17% quality each, or like 13 or whatever, no, 14 at least,
I mean,
right?
sort of
Because
you
then you'd
did,
set up to
though.
40.
Because if you just
How?
went there and had your stuff filled, like your inventory filled up with stuff, and you put it in the trade thing, then you would see what you would get back. Like it does a little outline thing. You can
Yeah,
mouse
but
over it and be
how
like,
is
oh,
that
this.
accessible to a new player as an
Oh no,
information? Like
it's
how
not.
they...
It's not. But then Path of Exile 1 isn't accessible to new players. Like it never has proposed itself to be. Like it's never been like, I'm going to be transparent about how something exists. In fact, it seems to delight in being obscure. Every discussion I've ever had with an experienced Path of Exile player is like, oh, I loved figuring out things blind. And I was like, did you? Did you actually figure it out? Did you watch a video? Did somebody tell you? Like, did you figure it out because you just happened by it on it by chance? Like,
I
don't.
think
That's the only reason anything happens in Path of Exile is because people do stuff by accident.
I think when people say that they enjoyed that aspect of learning about the game, is that they enjoyed the feeling of overcoming the friction. They didn't really enjoy the friction.
Yeah, but I think there's ways to create friction in game design that is like a good friction experience, and that would be like killing a monster or killing a boss, right? Those are the frictions that you want to play against. Frictions that are created by UI or by NPC interactions are less satisfying unless there's a really good payoff.
By obscurity of information. Or obscuring of information. Right. I should have had a question in the back of my head prepared for when we were running dry on that. There's so many things.
I mean, we've been going for about 2 hours.
Yeah, I don't want to take too much of your time either. That's good, a good point.
I
me
just
quickly-
wonder if there's any further, like, really meaningful conversations that we can achieve in the same session. That
Absolutely,
isn't-
because for you it's really early and for me it's really late. So I'm running
yeah,
my
you're gonna
course
be running on
and
dry.
you, yeah. And
But I
you
also
probably...
said some really cool shit earlier, and I'm like, I don't know how much more I can keep up with that. Like,
No,
the
you
expectation
were
might be
remarkable.
here, and I think
You
it's like,
exceeded
woo!
all expectations for such an early session. I don't know if I could be that functional early in the day. No, you're right.
My light has changed, and I need to turn on my light, but I can't because I'm on the like little one, and I'm like, ooh, hope you can see me in the dark here.
I can see you great. I just can't see under your desk the way that I could see before. I couldn't tell
Yeah,
whether the
'cause I
cats are
had to
still
put
there or
the
whether they
blind
moved away.
down.
Damn. Well, I think that's maybe a good cutting off point then. I don't know. Like maybe I'll come up with... The thing is when I rewatch this, I'll be like, oh man, I should have asked that and that and that.
That's
Then I'll
cool.
do it right away. But no, I think this is great. We can do
Did you
another
want to
one
talk
in a
about
week or two from now.
podcasts?
Oh yeah, good that you remind me of that, because the audience would have crucified me for not asking about that. But you did have a little bit of experience in running a podcast as well. How did that come about? What can you tell me about the origin story? You know the co-hosts beforehand? How did you meet or get into touch with each other? How much did you know each other, and how did you decide to make a podcast together?
I think Path of Exile community is both very, very close and also very, very separate at the same time. And depending on like which community that you're making content in, it can feel like you can't talk to other people in the community, or you can feel like you're in competition with them. And certainly some creators can view things that way or approach things that way. And there was a time that, like, in the space of being online, where, like, during the pandemic and stuff, I just felt like I wanted to see more people in the same screen together than see them separately. So that if you were scrolling through the directory, you would see that thumbnail and see those people together, rather than having them all doing their own thing. Yes, it's important that we were all doing our own things. like doing our own content, doing what it is that makes us special and interesting. But like the reason the podcast exists or existed is because I personally felt the need to be connected to other creators, and I wanted other people to see that. Not just me,
Okay.
I wanted to see us talking together and just like sharing our enthusiasm for this game. And I felt like there were perspectives at that time that weren't being captured by the like dominant podcasts of Path of Exile at the time. And so I think the thing with me and creators and being in on Twitch and being in PoE or other spaces even, because I've like journeyed into other communities as well, is that you can get this very like tunnel vision like focus, like it's just PoE. I only want to talk to other PoE creators, or I only want to talk to people who play hardcore. I only want to talk to people who play hardcore solo self fun, because what could I possibly have to discuss with anyone who doesn't, right? And that can feel like when you're creating a podcast lineup of hosts, like they're just your mates and you've just asked them to do a show together, right? And then you realize, you don't necessarily realize when you're creating that you've kind of done this tunnel vision version of how to discuss the game, where it's like blinded to a whole bunch of other points of view or perspectives. There's been like through the COVID era, the average player discussion came up so much, and we continually had these giga chad players. I'll use their term. It's their term. I don't really care for it. I don't think you're a giga chad. I don't think that's a compliment. It sounds awful to say out loud. But the giga chad players are defining what the average player is. And they're continually wrong and arguing with each other about it. And I was like, I'm not the average player. I am better than the average player, but I'm not as good as them. And I thought, I want to talk to other people who are also not the average player, but have other interests in the game that are different from mine. Like, I'm interested in this and this and this about the game. And the people that I spoke to, like, I had separate conversations with all of them, or I interacted with their stream, or I met Noodle at TwitchCon and hung out with her. And this was in 2019. That I've always just been about opposite action. And so, like, maybe my anxiety and my impulse is to keep to myself and not talk to people. But I like to try and tell myself, do the opposite of that instinct and reach out. And people will say yes and people will say no. And so my lineup of incredible co-hosts were really entertaining and had great insights, and they all had different things to say. And they were like, I don't know, I loved what Baited Expectations became because of who they were. And it was so fun to be in the show. But
Did it change over the course of time? Like the year that it's been running? Like the vision for the first episode, did the vision TM, did it change? Where you're like, okay, I realize like what works and what doesn't work, and we're gonna shift focus a little bit into this or that direction? Was there
a little bit? I think so, because like we wanted it to be shorter than the other shows, and then we just found that people just really like chatting. And I was like, it's too hard. Like, I would direct a conversation, but I loved the little interactions that would happen between people. Like, what I liked about podcast, or what I liked about making Baited Expectations, I actually don't think is a podcast, or what I think of as a podcast anyway. It's more of a web show, and what I liked was different dynamics happening between people and having a discussion, like discourse in particular. What I don't want, but I think of works better in a podcast format, is more scripted stuff. If I wanted to do the project again, I would probably reduce the number of people I was working with. And then, yeah, like I think you and Baylor having 2 people is a good number. Because you don't have as many dynamics to worry about in terms of like what people want out of it. Like the way I ran the show was I would come up with a topic list. I would share the topic list with the other co-hosts, and they had the option to add or take away from it or provide insight. And I think
So people would veto certain topics and be like, I don't want to talk about this, or I don't have anything of value to say about it. I don't want it to be brought up, or
I guess they could. No one ever vetoed anything.
okay. I'm just trying to understand like how it worked.
But, well, the thing is, like, I wanted people to collaborate more than they did. I gave them opportunity to do so, but not always did that happen. And I think that was probably one of my disappointments with it. Was like, instead of it becoming something that we could prepare in advance and then run with some kind of like we could research people's perspectives or whatever, and then be able to like ask follow-up questions. It would just become like, just, you know, people would talk and you would listen, and then it was like, it came out well. It's not like I think it was a failure, but I definitely experienced a lot of things that I would like to try and learn a bit more about. And I think if I was going to run another show like that, I would do 2 people, and then we would work together on the topic list so that we knew what the other person was going to ask a little bit. Like, you wouldn't prepare the answer fully ahead of time, but
you play the options through in your head, and you kind of know where you're going, or where you could be going.
Because the alternative is that you sit and listen quietly, and then you have nothing to say afterwards, and it's awkward.
Yeah,
do you know
I
what
can
I
totally
mean?
relate to that. Absolutely. I mean, obviously, you were a live witness to this happening earlier.
Yeah,
Right
but
when we were like at the 2-hour mark, and I was like, okay, now I should have prepared a really good question to ask as a follow-up. But I find it much easier to do in a 2-people setup to be prepared for that, like you said, than it is to like trying to cater to 4 different people.
yeah. And I do, like, I think an example was, I don't know, there was a point in time where Path of Exile was like really tiring. And so I was like, fuck it, for beta, we're going to do the streamer social. And I had like 8 creators in one stream just doing anything but talking about Path of Exile. That was like the name of that game. And
Yeah.
I want to do more streamer socials. I never did, but I wanted to. And there were people who were like, oh, I really would have liked to have been involved in that.
Absolutely.
And I felt so bad about it, because I was like, I don't know if you guys would want to waste your time on my silly little experiment. I think the thing that I've always liked is less about creating a podcast and more about creating different personality interactions and seeing like how people's dynamics can change in different contexts and who they're interacting with. And
Absolutely, especially when it's people that you don't normally see interact in, or at least
yeah,
not interact in a specific context, and then you provide the context and you set the people
yeah.
up, and you're like, okay, what happens now?
Like when
How
we
is it going
started
to play
bringing
out?
guests onto the show, I wanted to have people who weren't guests on other podcasts all the time. Like, I wanted to have Suit as our first guest because Suit is a figurehead in the community, or was. And, like, has such a huge contribution and wealth of knowledge and a perspective that isn't seen. And, like, having Local on Beta was huge. Like, I'm so glad that Local actually wanted to join and be part of it.
Maybe quickly mention who you're talking about. I
Oh,
assume you're talking about
so
Local Identity, but for people
yeah, I'm talking
listening,
about Local
who is that?
Identity. Local Identity, who works on Path of Building Fork, and is probably like the main point of reference. Although like a lot of people contribute to the making of Path of Building, because it's open source. Like Local kind of keeps the project going. It's funny because I feel like when I was interviewing Local at the time, like when we were trying to talk to him, I did not understand what I understand about project management now, and I think I would have different questions if I was to interview him again. But
Right.
because I didn't get that was like what he was doing.
Okay.
But yeah,
I-
Beta Baited was, I don't know, it's like I've said this several times on my stream, but I never wanted to host a podcast, but I kind of saw an opportunity and I saw a gap and I wanted to fill that gap. And I didn't, like a lot of times you wait for someone else to do it. And I'm like, well, why should someone else do it? I'll do it. I could do it.
That reminds me so much of what Cat always said about Bayclast, where he was like, so many people tell me you should do this, you should have that person, you should do your podcast that way, and he was always like, I encourage you to do your own podcast. He was
Taki was a really good friend of mine, and that is why, like, that influence was why.
Have you talked to him recently, out of curiosity?
I saw him in December last year. When I was in London for 2 days.
All right, cool.
He is very fond of his dog walking and training.
Okay, cool.
I think he likes having a lot more connection to the IRL world.
No, that's good to hear, because frequently people ask me whether I talk to him, and I can only say, oh, I haven't talked to him. So it's good to hear that he's doing well.
No, it's quite hard to get him to reply these days, unless you give him a really good message that like hits him from the left field. He'll be like, ooh, interesting. But yeah, I reckon if I showed up in London again, he would still meet up with me, so that's nice.
Right. No, that's great. I think I really don't want to overstay my welcome and not take too much of your time out of the day.
Yeah.
And you provided so many great points for me to come up with good follow-up questions, and I feel like I learned so much more about you and your perspective and where you come from, and I really feel like I gained a deep understanding of your relationship to these topics, and specifically to Path of Exile. I would have liked to go more into detail about your experience in Path of Exile 2, and of course a lot of other topics.
Had enough,
but yeah, that's why I'm saying it'd probably be interesting to do that in a couple weeks from now again, and to see how your perspective has evolved.
I feel like I've wanted to make videos to say like what my impression of the game is, but I'm still forming it, honestly. Like, I was thinking, I should do periodic updates, but I feel like I need more time. I was thinking about doing one per each act, though. I don't know. I've done 2, though, so now I feel like I'd be poisoned talking about Act 1.
Yeah. No, my feeling with stuff like that is always, I'm afraid that the value of the video that I make first will not hold up. That it will just be an obsolete video by the time the next one comes around, which is obviously flawed because...
No, it's not like that. Like, I think the problem is I've just been a bit scattered, but I do want to make some videos myself and talk about, like, my experience of the game and my perspective of it. But I feel like a lot of people being, like, pumping out, Path of Exile bad, Path of Exile good, or, like, endgames this or whatever, or talking about builds, of course. And I think I want, like, it's more that I'm refining my opinion, even, before I can even express it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, I guess.
Sorry, my
similar
cat sounds.
That's cat sounds?
I think so.
I hear like a faint tapping at best.
Yeah, so do I, but I don't know where it's coming from.
Well,
maybe my audio is dying, and it's a good note to end on.
I don't think the audio is dying. It's just I can't point my finger to it. But yeah, it was really great to have you on for this. I so spontaneously came up with the idea for this. Like
May
2
I
days
ask,
ago, I was
why me as your first person in this new series?
It just came to me. Like, there was like this weird moment where a couple of weeks ago someone asked you on Twitter whether you're going to be on Faded soon, and then you said we had talked but then hadn't talked in a long time, and that was
Mm.
sort of lingering in the back of my head. And then like 2 days ago I was really tired in the evening, and I was like just sitting in bed and listening to music and like thinking things, and I was like, I'd really like to talk to Pi about this. And I don't know why I had this desire all of a sudden to talk to you, and I was like, well, I would have even like just called you and just talked privately, but I thought this would be so interesting for people to listen to that as, hey, it would be cool if we just talked on stream while I was playing the game, maybe. Or maybe I could
Mm.
kick off my holiday season with that, just Friday night, like start up
Mm.
playing the game, get you on stream and talk about things, just talk about the background, how life is and all. This doesn't necessarily have to be PoE related. And then as the idea
Marinated.
marinated is a good word, yeah. I was gonna say fermented, I think. Um,
That's a good one. I like that one.
yeah, because yeast is so cool. As the idea fermented,
Oh
I was
God,
just
come back.
wow.
Okay.
I hate that autofocus adjustment.
It's
No,
the
I,
low
I
light. I need to turn the light on. Or like
honestly
open the blind a bit.
back when I started Faded Connections with WaifuGate originally, we
I
had
remember
a
that.
brainstorm about names, and ultimately went with Faded Connections because Waifu just blurted it out when I was like, hey, maybe we can find something in the game, or like some items, some prophecies, some sort of div card name or something like that, and then he's just bam, and it came out like that. I was like, wow, okay, that's genius, and we'll just go with that. But I think before that, I actually, out of silliness, suggested Podcats, and I was really really disappointed when I learned. Like I looked it up between the inception of Faded, and now
Mm.
I looked it up a couple of times, and there was other people who started up podcasts that were called Podcats in the meantime, but I couldn't
Yeah.
find any podcast that is active with that name. And then
It's
I
like
just
baited though. Like baited expectations was like the div card, I think, or a
yeah,
prophecy, I
exactly,
forgot which. And
the fishing one, right?
but
For a
then
random
there was
fishing
a
item.
very high profile podcast just called Baited by like YouTubers or something, like mainstream YouTubers.
Oh yeah, but like there's
And
also like a Faded romance podcast or something like that. Every time I Google Faded, I find that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But like in the community, if you Google baited, like it would have shown you baited expectations because that's what you wanted, and your like content, like your search history would be so dominated by Path of Exile that it would have been like synonymous. Um, and I just was like, I think baited expectations was really a good name for what we were trying to do.
I was always worried it could be a dig at Faded. I was like, okay,
No, but
maybe
I
they
did.
think that we're not living up to the premise that we're trying to be, and that's
No,
why
no,
they're calling
no.
it Baited Expectations. No, I mean obviously it was just a like silly little fear or like thing,
No,
or not
I
even a
mean,
fear,
I get it. Like,
fascination.
I knew
I
it
would have
sounded
liked
like
it.
faded. I knew it sounded like faded, and I was like, that's a problem because our names rhyme.
Baited, baited.
Yeah.
We made it.
Anyway,
There's also bated breath in the game.
yes. And the other name we were thinking about, but we thought it had like very little pizzazz or identity, was Three Voices, because that's a thing. And then we ended up getting a fourth host on permanently because Noodle was never meant to be like a main, like part of the main cast. Noodle didn't know how much he could commit to the project, and then ended
Right.
up becoming like a pretty permanent figure in the lineup.
Because it was so much fun.
Also, yeah, I know. I guess
Or
whatever
because
she was
she
getting out of it.
enjoyed Path of Exile more than she expected. I don't know. Like
No, I
she
mean she's just wonderfully talented, and as are they all.
absolutely. Yeah, I really enjoyed it for its runtime, and but the thing is also, I have to say, and I multiple times I considered discontinuing Faded just because I feel like it becomes increasingly difficult to not repeat yourself and to not get stale after so many episodes, which obviously with Faded, it's a lot easier because of the concept that we always have two different new guests and you can have so many different combinations of potential guests. But I've also definitely felt like what I would try to create in the community that wasn't there at the time has long been replaced, because you know that like Faded went from being like super underdog to, at a time, a lot of people would have considered it the main Path of Exile podcast for some reason, which I never did, but it did really good numbers at a certain time, and now it actually went back to a point where there's so many other people doing podcasts now. Like, we had big creators from other games leaking into Path of Exile who started collaborating, but there's also so many people who just started up their own podcast. You have the Maxroll guys who all like are employed by Maxroll to write build guides and stuff, and they're doing their own Maxroll podcast now. Basically, I feel like they purchased, or they acquired Tuna's Blastcast, and Tuna is now organizing like a podcast between the Maxroll members all the time. And there's so many different podcasts that, I almost feel like the concept of Faded, of bringing different community voices together that you normally don't see interact, is obsolete, because that's already happening. Like, people are already coming together in the weirdest and most refreshing constellations by themselves.
But
It doesn't need me anymore to
But it
bring them
doesn't
together.
necessarily mean that you can't reinvent what Faded Connections means.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You can always reinvent. I'm just saying, like, the original reason or the original concept of how I wanted to do it, and it can still provide value. It's just like, I'm saying, it's not something that doesn't happen without it anymore. It doesn't have
honest,
that unique selling point anymore.
I'd say that I think that in the PoE space, there's probably always going to be a spot for like something that Baited Expectations was doing. I don't think that it's still being done now. I still think the burden of Path of Exile related content is being shifted to the higher like time investment individuals who know more about the game, and therefore that like middle ground is missing still.
But there's been so many people like asking for bringing on non-streamers and non-content creators and even non-PoE experts onto the podcast to hear the
Faded? For Faded?
For Faded, yeah, for Faded. I don't know about
because
Baited, but I...
Well, no, I mean, people just say they miss it. But if I was to like try and recreate it, and I'm not sure that it's something that I want to do, it would be reinvented. Like, it would come back completely different. But yeah, though, I can see that, because I think you're getting that feedback too. People want to hear different voices, not just creative voices. But is it being done? I think
they want to hear your so-called average player and the absolute newcomer, right? Coming in from a different game, or even without any ARP
people
background.
Who are newcomers, and I talk to them about it like all the time. Yeah. It's actually probably an area of opportunity, particularly with Path of Exile 2 in early access.
Right. So, what would be your advice for someone who wants to start their own Path of Exile podcast? I guess that would be a nice one to round off on.
I think that you want to very quickly figure out what your goal is with your show. How many people you want to collaborate with, and how much responsibility is yours versus theirs, and have that very clearly communicated between each other.
That's a good one.
That's my, and also make sure that it's an ongoing discussion, and that you and your collaborators feel comfortable to continue discussing and being very honest with each other about whether you guys are getting what you want out of it.
Yeah, like with any collaboration, really, where you just have to clearly communicate what are the expectations, what are you willing to give, what are you expecting to get out of it, and how can we make this sustainable.
In this content creator space, because we're all very like casual, ad hoc individuals who just started streaming from our own homes, the like nature of collaborating with each other is like, hey, you do want to do this thing, and there's not always a lot of thought or planning put into it. And yeah, that's fine. Like, you can have, what is it Stoling or whatever, the podcast that 2's does with Quinn and them?
Quinn, Mathel, and Steele, yeah, Stalling.
Yeah, I don't know that I've ever watched it, but I don't imagine. Okay, you can tell me, is there a
Probably
structure to
not.
it?
I do believe Ziz writes an outline or has an outline written for him by someone
But then he
to
just
make
kind
sure
of
that they have.
bats the ball around and lets it go, right? Like they probably don't read the outline; they just experience it in real time.
I
They
think
probably
Ziz
have the
reads the
opportunity
outline
to
and
read
has
it.
it present and tries to direct it a little bit, and he also has his mods and his managers, right, like helping him in the background, like drawing his attention to things, to questions that were left unanswered, or like talking points that need to be brought up within a certain time, or when they need to move on from a topic. I could imagine that that's a thing, although I've never talked to Ziz about whether he has that in the background. But what I will say is that while I haven't watched Stalling in like a solid year or two, so I don't know, I can't speak to the actual how it works right now. But what I've always admired about Ziz when he did the one-on-one interviews with GGG devs, or when he did his AMA series with different content creators, I always thought Ziz was really good at conducting the conversation and asking follow-up questions, and
Yeah.
always seemed very well prepared.
Yeah, so I
I'm
think the
always
reason that
looking forward.
stalling
Yeah.
works is because Ziz is organized. And the expectation is that Ziz is going to carry that organizational responsibility, and that the others will just show up and he will sort of facilitate that discussion. And so that's why that works. But then there are different ways those dynamics can work, and that doesn't have to be the only way that it's done. And I think if it wasn't those individuals, it probably wouldn't play out that way or anywhere near as well.
Yeah, I guess it depends on what your goal is. Like you said,
Yeah, that was my first
the
point, though.
difference.
If you want to start a podcast, figure out what your goal is first. And then
Yeah, I mean,
everything else
it
comes from
links
there.
best to back to what you said about the difference between having like a sort of online, just an online show versus an actual podcast, where you expect, at least with the way that you understand the word podcast, a much more structured approach. Whereas an online show, you could just like put people in a pot together and see what's
Yeah,
gonna
and honestly,
start
like the
cooking.
standard or the expectation around what a podcast is very much like merged with a web show these days. But I still think that there is like a nuance to be had, and taking the time to think about that and make those decisions is going to inform your show, or whether it's a podcast or a show. Will definitely make it better for taking the time to take that and make that decision.
All right.
I'm gonna end
Thanks
on
so
that
much. Yeah. Just to round things off completely and to take it way back. Did you already have breakfast, or are you going to have breakfast now?
I'm gonna go have breakfast.
What are you gonna have for breakfast?
I'm going to make a bagel with cream cheese and tomatoes.
Awesome. That
And
sounds
have another coffee
inspiring.
probably.
So you did have a coffee beforehand.
I did.
That
Like I actually
that
woke
helps.
up at 7 and I was like, should I be anxious about this? And then I tried to decide that I wasn't gonna be anxious about this, and I've decided I'm not.
That's good. I was anxious about it. I did like a caffeine detox like a week ago, and I fell asleep so much at work.
Did you get
Luckily,
any
no one noticed.
cramps? Like I had leg cramps when I detoxed from it.
I honestly didn't make that connection, but I did have some cramps. Yeah, but I don't know whether they were more cramps than I have when I do caffeine. What, like kind of leg cramps, like thighs
Yeah.
or okay. I've like
It's
involuntary contractions of a different kind, like where like like it's shivering or like
spasms. Yeah.
triggering itself. I don't know whether it's a spasm exactly, but yeah.
But I also was quitting sugar at the same time. So you can get headaches as well. Okay, we
Yeah,
digress.
sugar is a rough one. Yeah. Hey, once again, thank you so much for taking time to do this and to go into this like completely unbiased and giving me an absolute, a chance and a what we call advance and trust that I'm not going to completely mess it up. Like I do think I have to improve massively as a host over the course of running this one. But yeah, thank you for helping me try this out and helping me find out what I need to work on to make this show what I want it to be. And
No worries.
and thanks for giving me all this insight on your personal and your professional background. Is just It sounds so silly to say that, but there's always so much more than meets the eye. And when you realize that other people are like complete persons who have like complete lives as well, and like complete upbringings and like years and decades of experience, it's as much as it should be something that's natural and you like should expect that. Obviously, that's the case. It's just, yeah, it's such an eye-opening experience. And so,
It's like one thing to know that about someone, and it's completely other thing to sort of like put it all together and actually like make space for it to be something that you get to experience.
wise words. I'll let those ferment as well. Well, thank you so much once again, and have a wonderful breakfast. And yeah, to the audience, thanks for being here with us for this very first episode. I plan to make more happen, and because I want to celebrate. It sounds so sexist when I say that, but I want to celebrate females, and I want to have the first 10 episode only female creators. We're gonna give the spotlight to girls, and see what happens. And then probably the 11th episode is going to be Balor. Have to. The thing is, if I can prove to Balor that the one-on-one concept works, then I definitely want to do the one-on-one with Balor. But Balor has always been shying away from doing Faded without any guests because he thinks that he would be too boring. And I always think like maybe he doesn't think that, but he thinks he's boring, but he thinks actually I'm boring if I don't have more guests. And like, but I don't think so. I met him in LA and it was so fun.
Oh, did you? Oh, you finally got to meet? That's so good.
Yeah. You didn't see the photos? I'll send you a picture.
Oh,
it was,
please do.
Yeah.
He didn't say anything
awesome.
to me, but you know he's got like that real compartmentalization, like if it's out of sight, out of mind. If I ask him about it, he'll tell me. But
dude, if I
didn't know
don't
it
send him a
happened.
message about an upcoming Faded episode, he's like gone. Like I don't know. Like it always feels like he completely forgets I exist. But I know that
He's
he
got
works
ADHD,
different
dude.
than other people, so I completely get it. Before we dive into this any further, let's give you the chance to take off. And once again, thanks to the audience. And if you've been supporting recently, it is tradition that your name is shown on the end screen. I'll play a quick outro and then we'll end it. And I'll communicate the next episode once it's planned on Twitter and all the social media. As always, thanks. And check out Pi on all the platforms, man. This lady is super. I don't want to say a word that's wrong.
What's the
Super
word?
is a good word to end on. That is
I'm
no. Thanks
super.
very much. It was so much fun with you, and time flew. And I would love to spend more, but I could be a better host if I wasn't so tired. So next time, bye bye.
I know a lot of people want to send blankets or water. Just send your cash.